City of Angels off the Pacific Ocean. Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. Welcome to America's most listened to late night talk show, Coast to Coast AM. Full open lines for you this hour. Get ready for the numbers. Next hour, Dr. Wayne Dyer with an in-depth look at intention, what he calls a force in the universe. Well, yesterday, first hour, we were talking about Mount St. Helens as really geologists are amazing. Presents Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. Tonight we're going to look at intention as a field of energy that you can access to begin co-creating your life. And we are going to be talking with world-renowned author Dr. Wayne Dyer about that in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Millions. Dr. Wayne Dyer, called the father of motivation by his fans, is one of the most widely known and respected people in the field of self-empowerment. He became a well-known author with his best-selling book, Your Erroneous Zones, and has gone on to write many other self-help classics. Despite his childhood spent in orphanages and foster homes, Dr. Dyer, who has a doctorate in counseling and psychotherapy, has overcome many obstacles to make his dreams come true. Today, he spends much of his time showing others how to do the same. First-time guest on Coast to Coast AM, Dr. Wayne Dyer. Wayne, how are you? Welcome to the program.
Well, I'm great, George. Nice to be with you.
My pleasure. No, so you went to Wayne State University. I went to the University of Detroit.
Oh, my goodness. Really? Right down the street on 6 Mile Road?
Absolutely.
Yes, well, I spent a lot of time there. I also taught at Mercy College and at Our Lady of Mercy High School many, many years ago, back in the 60s.
Almost right up the school from my university, right up the street.
Yes, exactly, right.
Last night I had another guest who graduated from Wayne State, and so that's two in a row. That's pretty ironic.
Is that right? I had a former student who played basketball for the University of Detroit, an All-American. He lived in my home. I tutored him and worked with him for years. His name was Spencer Haywood.
Spencer Haywood was in my broadcasting class.
Is that right?
Yep.
Well, Spencer was like my son. He came up from Mississippi. I was teaching at Pershing High School in Detroit, and I was the assistant coach on the basketball team there for a while. And he, he could barely read at that time, and I tutored him almost every single day. Took him on his tours to the various colleges where he went. He ultimately played for the University of Detroit and went on to the Olympics and played for the Pistons and the Lakers. And was a great friend.
Oh, he sure was. And he had not to digress into basketball, but he had the University of Detroit used to have so tremendous tradition in basketball, but they really hadn't had a great team since Dave DeBusschere used to play for them, and then all of a sudden up popped Spencer, and the team just took off like a rocket.
Absolutely. Dave DeBusschere and I were neighbors. We lived a block apart, so we played a lot of ball together.
That's a small world.
Right, right.
You have gone through a tremendous evolution yourself, especially since your childhood.
Well, yeah, I guess so. I spent my earliest years in a series of foster homes out in Mount Clemens, Michigan, and in Detroit. My father walked out on us when I was just a baby, and my mother placed my next oldest brother, Dave, and myself in a series of homes, and got her family back together in 1949 when I was 9 years of age. And I don't look upon it as a great hardship, though. I think it was, I think everything that we go through in our life, we're supposed to go through it. It teaches us whatever it is. I think I came here to teach self-reliance, and it's almost as if God said, look, if you really want to teach self-reliance, then you better spend 10 years or so in an orphanage and learn how to rely upon yourself, and then you'll know. and you'll never be able to have anyone dissuade you from that kind of a knowing.
The only thing I really know of orphanages is when you see stories, old ones, for example, of days back in London, for example, and things like that. Oliver,
right.
Yeah. I mean, I would hope things were better for you.
They were. I mean, George, when you're an orphan, you don't wake up every day and say, "Oh my God, why am I an orphan? Why did this happen to me? Poor me." When you're an orphan and you're 6 years old, you wake up and you go out into the world, and that's the world you're in, and you do what you're destined to do, and you get out there and you play and you work and you enjoy it, whatever. Then you turn 40. It seems a few months later, and then you look upon all of the things in your past to explain why you're an alcoholic or why you're going through a divorce or why things aren't working in your life, and you say, "Oh, I was an orphan, or my mother liked my sister better, or we didn't have anything," and we can use all of those things in our past as excuses, or we can take inventory of everything that's ever happened to us, use it productively, and be grateful for it, and that's the way I treated it. There were some nights that were tough, but by and large, it was a very divine experience for me.
Someone along the line must have had a tremendous influence on you, though, to help chart you in the direction you went, or did you do that all on your own?
I don't remember anybody real early in my life having that. It seems like I came into this world with a knowing. I had a knowing that if I wanted something, I could go out and get it. I always say I was the richest kid in the orphanage. I was giving a talk. I was being interviewed on a TV show in Chicago a few months ago, and the woman said she was. You knew that the zinger was coming. I mean, she was like talking to me about all the various things in my books, and finally she said, there's a lot of people that would say that you're making a lot of money off of these kinds of ideas and capitalizing on that. And I said, well, they would be right. I have made a lot of money. She said, well, don't you feel guilty about that? I said, it's not my fault. I said, money is something that has always come to me. I've never known scarcity. Even when I lived in places where nobody else had it around me, I always had kind of an internal knowing that if I wanted money, for example, when I lived in Mount Clemens, and it would snow, I would go downstairs and I'd get the snow shovel, and I would sleep with the snow shovel, literally, so that nobody else could get it, and wake myself up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'd go out and instead of knocking on doors and so on, I would shovel everybody's
walks and
walk
driveways,
up and down on Tucker Street and on I'm trying to think of some of that, Goodwill Avenue and all of them.
Sure.
And then I would the next morning I'd go there with my little orphan clothes on, and I would knock on the door and I'd tell them I had shoveled their snow, and they would always give me a dime or sometimes a quarter. I mean, that doesn't sound like much now, but that's a couple $1,000s in today's money.
Absolutely.
I always knew that. I always had an awareness of being able to do that, whether it was going out and collect. When I found out that you could get 2 cents for a soda pop bottle, I mean, I used to follow people around who were drinking a Coca-Cola and say, "Look, how long will you be with that?"
Yeah, are you done yet?
Yeah, right, exactly. I had that, and it was like we had in those days we had coal furnaces, and I would carry out people's ashes, or I'd go down to the local grocery store and just carry out groceries for people. There was always a way, an internal knowing that I could attract what I wanted to in my life, and I don't remember anybody in particular as being significant early in my life. Later on, I can remember some very important people.
There is a tremendous message there in your ability to picture things, and then they become. And I wonder, Wayne, how many people don't understand that you have an ability, and probably all of us do, to be able to visualize things, as you say in your book, The Power of Intention, to create things when you just set your mind to it.
Yeah, it's the power of a great vision, and having a great vision is something that I've just always been blessed with. I call it thinking from the end. And, it's like the top 10 secrets for success for me and inner peace, one of them is to act as if what you would like to have is already here, and to really act that way and live that way and have an internal feeling about it, almost as if you can smell it. I remember, when I wanted to get my first car, I would go down to I couldn't afford to get the car, but I can remember picturing it and going down and sitting in the car and sniffing the leather and just sort of getting that picture of myself driving it. And ultimately, if you keep a picture of what it is that you would like to attract into your life, whatever it might be, whether it's a job or whether it's abundance of some kind, or whatever, anything that you can put your attention on, you'll ultimately, if you understand that we become what we think about, we act upon our inner thoughts. If you keep that thought there, and I learned that. When you talk about influence, though, one of the great influencers in my life was Abraham Maslow, who I was blessed to have as a great teacher and mentor. And he always said that the difference between ordinary people who live at ordinary levels of consciousness, and people who are what he called self-actualizers, is that self-actualizing people, the highest functioning people that we know, are people who never place their attention on what's missing, what is, if they don't like what is, what always has been, what used to be. They never think like that. They put their attention and keep it on what they intend to manifest, and it doesn't make any difference what kind of evidence comes their way or what kind of obstacles that they run into. They never take their mind off of that picture, and that's just the way I've always functioned in my life.
About a month ago, I'm in St. Louis, where I go back every once in a while, and someone came up to me out of the blue, knows me, and says, "George, have you ever had Dr. Wayne Dyer on your program before?" And I said, "No, I haven't." I said, "Actually, I've been thinking about it, but no, he's never been on before." And she said, "We ought to get him on because it'd be a great program." And I said, "Okay, I'll talk with my producers about it." Now, how weird is it that she was already working on getting you on the program way before I even mentioned it to her, and then this person comes up to me in St. Louis, mentions the same thing? Why do things like this happen?
Well, one of the great teachers again in my life was Carl Jung, and he called this idea that you're discussing here something. He called it synchronicity. It's almost as if you become a collaboration with fate. It happened to me yesterday. I called my friend Deepak Chopra. I'm sure you've heard.
Yes, he's been on the program.
Well, Deepak's a dear friend of mine. We've done a lot of work together. We've done tapes together. We've traveled around the world together, and I haven't talked to Deepak in a month or so, and I picked up there was a number on my cell phone with the area code 858, and I thought it was my publicist calling about this show, as a matter of fact. So I called, and I hear this funny Indian voice on the other, and I said, "Jackie, is that you?" And he said, "Wait, who is this? Is that Will Wayne?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Wayne, you are not going to believe this in a million years." He said, 1 minute ago, my wife, Rita, was talking to me on the phone. She said, "I saw him on a PBS special and was talking about Wayne and his books, and you call accidentally and pick up the telephone." This collaboration with fate. It's something that if every single listener out there in the country tonight, you were to interview every one of them, they would all say, this is something that has happened to me. I was thinking about my sister. I haven't talked to her in 5 years. The telephone rings, and it's my sister calling. I was thinking, this kind of thing happens to me on a regular basis with my secretary, when I'll be thinking about something I want her to call me. I'm on Maui, she's in Florida, and the telephone will ring, and it will be her. So we call these kinds of experiences, we call them coincidences. And the interesting thing about the word coincidence is that it's a mathematical term that comes from the word coincide. And in mathematics, if you remember Geometry 101, two angles that fit together perfectly are said to coincide. So now we've taken this term that means something that fits together perfectly, and we've identified it as something that happens in happenstance or happens accidentally. And that's, I think, what we need to really understand and tune into, that there is an energy field in the universe, and that when you are tuned into it, and the more intuitive you get, and the more you get out of your own ego and get into this sphere of intention, this sphere of this mystical place, whether you call it God or soul or spirit, the more you're connected to that, these kinds of things begin to not only be something that happen, but you begin to expect them, and then you start anticipating it, and then you actually can get out in front of your life, and you can see these things coming and put your attention on them and make them work for you, rather than seeing them as accidents.
Wayne, is it possible to shift this paradigm and get masses of people to begin thinking exactly this way, in this direction?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, if you look within an atom, for example, when you start studying quantum physics and you look within an atom and you start artificially manipulating the electrons, let's say there's 100 billion of them in one atom, as you start to artificially actually line them up, and you start aligning, they're all randomly just jumping all around, all these particles. And as you get to a certain number, what they call a critical mass, or what they call the 100th monkey, when you get to that particular one, let's say 273 billion out of 500 billion, all of a sudden line up, and then all of a sudden, at that second, at that instant of critical mass, all the rest of the electrons within that atom automatically begin to make that shift. It's something they call in physics, they call it phase transition. And at that moment, and all of us are nothing but electrons in a body, in a cell called humanity. And when enough of us begin to think and act and feel in a certain way, our actions literally send out pheromones of energy out there to help everybody else align as well. And when you're around people who convey to you certain kinds of spirituality and certain higher consciousness, and they just make you feel good, just being in their presence allows you to feel like a happier, more fulfilled, more destined human being.
Absolutely. But on the other take, you can be around people who are just the opposite of that kind of person, and you have to try to run away from them because you feel lousy.
Yeah, absolutely. They can send that energy. But the problem very often and what happens for most of us is that when we're around real low energy people who do bring us down, what happens is what's happening technically is that they are not literally bringing us down. We go down because we join them. In other words, we hate people for hating us, or we get angry for people who for being angry at us, or we get depressed when we're around depressing people. And as St. Francis put it so beautifully in his powerful prayer, he didn't say because he didn't have any peace, please give me some peace. God, I don't have any peace. He said, make me an instrument of thy peace. In other words, where there is hatred, let me bring love. Let me bring a higher energy to the presence of this low energy, and I can not only can I eliminate it, I can convert it. Like in a dark room, which is a very low energy, when you're about to bring a candle into a dark room, you don't have to announce to the darkness, you better scurry now. You're going to have to get out of here because I'm going to bring light here. When you bring light to the presence of darkness, the darkness not only dissolves, but it's converted to light. And that's really the message of the power of intention. That's the message for all of us, is to be of such a high spiritual energy that when we do encounter these low energies, I always give the example of Jesus. When people would say can you imagine Jesus saying, no, I don't want to be around all of those thieves over there. They just bring me down. They make me depressed. I don't want to be around those prostitutes because, they'll just give me temptations, and I don't want to be around them. We laugh because it's absurd, because when Jesus would be around people of lower energy, he would not only, eliminate those low energies, he would convert them, and people would want to be more like he was.
And that was a gift, indeed, to be able to do
absolutely.
that. You mentioned St. Francis, pretty influential in your life.
Most influential. I wrote an entire book about his prayer and called The Spiritual Solution to Every Problem. Went to Assisi. I've been there many times. I've read. I'm now reading my 5th biography of him. I feel so compellingly close to this man that I almost feel as if I was in his body at one time, or certainly very close. And especially when I was in Assisi, some of the absolutely astounding miracles that took place back there in the 13th century.
Didn't he have the stigmata also?
Yes, he was the very first person to have a confirmed experience of the stigmata. In fact, the last 2 years of his life on Mount Serbasio up in Perugia, he had to have his hands and his feet and his side bound every single night, otherwise he would bleed to death. That was in his 44th and 45th years. Such was his commitment to the life of Jesus. It was a very, very powerful, influential being. I've had the prayer of St. Francis with me. I took each line and wrote a chapter about it in The Spiritual Solution, and it's just been a divine experience. And under deep meditation and going within, I have actually felt the presence of St. Francis in my life. I have a statue that was carved by the people who lived in Assisi at the time that he was alive. I mean, those his ancestors all the way back, and he's been a very, very divine inspiration for me.
Did not live too long, did he?
He lived to the age of 40. I think he was 44 or 45. He was born in 1281, and he died, or 1181, and he died in 1225.
Of course, I guess in that time period, maybe that was an old age, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. There weren't too many people who lived much longer than the average life expectancy was in the 40s at that time. But he had spent a year in prison when he was in his early 20s, and he contacted malaria, and he suffered from it throughout his entire life.
The name of this book is called The Power of Intention, of course, by well-known author Dr. Wayne Dyer. First time here on Coast to Coast AM. Wayne, we've got a long night with you tonight.
It's great. I really look forward to it.
We'll take phone calls, and we'll just have people have an opportunity to chat with you, too, later on.
Sure.
The phone number, I want to give a couple things. So many people have already sent me what I have. I have a fast blast system here where people can instantly send me questions and notes, and everybody wants to know how to get this book. So I do want to get this number out now, and I'll do it a couple times tonight. There is a toll-free number, 800-654-5126. 800-654-5126. I assume, Wayne, this book is in bookstores now, right?
Absolutely. I would try bookstores. I wouldn't go to bakeries and places like that.
Not at all.
No, it's in all bookstores. It's been a very wonderful experience. It's on the bestseller list, and this is my very first experience of total automatic writing when I wrote this. I wrote it without an outline. I wrote it with a pen and a pad of paper in my hand, and
just let it flow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stay with us. Dr. Wayne Dyer, our guest, will be right back. His website is linked up right under his name on coasttocoastam.com, but it's Dr. D.R., drwaynedyer.com. I'm George Norrie. I'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM.
The official website of Coast to Coast AM is www.coasttocoastam.com. Log on now. Somewhere out there, this is Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie.
With our guest tonight, Dr. Wayne Dyer, and we'll be back with him in just a moment. And then a little later on tonight, we'll open up the phone lines and give you an opportunity to chat with him as well. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie with our special guest tonight, Dr. Wayne Dyer. Wayne, let's go back a little bit then into your youth. As someone who was in an orphanage and foster homes, what happened later on? Did you get adopted, or how were you able to put your life together?
My mother, bless her, and she'll be 89 on her next birthday, and she had a 188 game this week, bowling. She's an amazing.
That's about 40 points higher than me.
She's an unbelievable woman. She lived what I talk about. If you talk about inspiration later on in my life, she just wanted to get her children back together again. She had 3 boys. I was born in 1940. My brothers were born in 38, and in the last few days of 36. So she had 3 boys under the age of 4 by the time she was 21 years of age. And she, my father had walked out. My father was an alcoholic. My father had, abandoned his family. He never paid any support. He just left. He spent 5 years of his life in prison. He stole from just about everyone, and by all accounts, he was a bastard. And all of his ex-wives told me the same thing as I researched his life.
Yeah.
And my mother in 1949 remarried someone that she really wasn't in love with, but she knew that he would help her to get her family back together. And she repeated the same mistake, another alcoholic, another person that she was with for about 6 years. But it was her dream to have her boys all back together, and we got a little duplex over on Moross Road, which is 7 Mile Road on the east side of Detroit.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
20217, right? And she did get us all together. How we could have lived in that home, I went back to that home just recently, and it's just like a little closet. But at that time, that's what we did. And I went to the Detroit Public Schools and delivered the Detroit Times, and then the Detroit Free Press, and then the news. I had a milk route and paper routes, and then I worked in grocery stores and graduated in 1958 and went into the Navy for 4 years.
Small world, Wayne. I was on 7 Mile in Livernois on the west side.
Right.
Also went to the Navy. And
is that right? What year did you go in?
I was a direct commission, so I was kind of unusual, but I went in 1981.
Uh-huh.
And also, where you delivered the Detroit News, I worked in their building when I was at one of the television stations that at the time they owned.
Is that right?
Yeah, just a small... You talk about synchronicity.
Yes, you're not kidding. Anybody, what high school did you go to?
Well, my dad went to Cooley High School in Detroit, but I went to Laurie High School in Dearborn.
Oh, yeah, right.
And...
home of Orville Hubbard.
Oh, yeah. Crazy Orville Hubbard. And I was there during the riots. And
oh, yeah. My daughter was born in the middle of those riots on the 1st of August, 1967.
Ended up working at Channel 2, 4, 7. Did some radio for an old station at the time, which was called WCAR. I don't know if you remember. Oh, sure.
I remember that. Dick Burton, I think, was on that.
He was at WXYZ.
Right.
And now we're on CKLW in Detroit.
Oh,
and,
really?
It just...
That's amazing. Did you know J.P. McCarthy?
Yeah, sure did. He was one of my... If you look at people in broadcasting that had an influence on you, he was one of them.
He was on me, too. He was a very dramatically important guy to me. He went to De La Salle High School and was one of great voices. And you could always tell his voice. It was very unique, but he was a great interviewer, one of the very best.
Yep, absolutely. Were you... I don't want to say you were obsessed with trying to find out information about your father, but it obviously had some kind of impact on you.
The story of the story of my relationship to my father is probably most appropriate for the kind of things that are on Coast to Coast. I had because it talks about the mysterious and the kinds of things that are very difficult to prove through scientific method and so on. But I looked for my father for a long time. I was the only one that was obsessed with my father. My two brothers couldn't have cared less. My oldest brother lived with my grandmother through all those years, so he can actually remember my father. I have no memory of him at all because he left very shortly after I was born, and he never made a phone call. He never paid a penny in support. He just disappeared. As a matter of fact, when his mother, my grandmother, died when I was 15 years of age, I went to the funeral to be a pallbearer at that, and I didn't even know her, just because I wanted to see if he would show up, and so I could meet him, because I'd still not met my father at 15, and he didn't come. He sent a notice that he couldn't make it there. He was down in Alabama or something somewhere. So I went looking for my father, and I spent a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of energy just trying to find him. And then it was many years later. I was 34 years old. It was 1974, and I was a professor at St. John's University in New York City. And I took a part-time position with the U.S. government to fly down to Mississippi to find out whether or not some of these schools down there were complying with the new civil rights laws.
Okay,
so I went down to the Mississippi State College for Women in Columbus, Mississippi on an assignment. I went on the campus, and I spent the whole afternoon there. And I had received a note from a telephone call from a cousin of mine, another one of these. I had a whole series of relatives on my father's side that I didn't even know because I never had anything to do with my father. Her name was Dorothy Phillips, and she called me, and she said, I've heard that you've been looking for Lyle, your father. She said, but she said, I just want you. By this time, I was starting to get a little bit well-known. I had written some textbooks and so on. Mm-hmm. And she said, he died in 1964. Now, this is 10 years earlier. And I said, really? I said, well, where did he die? What were the circumstances?
Yeah.
She said, the only thing I can tell you is that he died in New Orleans, and he was an indigent, and I don't know what they did with his body. So I got on the telephone when I was going down to, it's now 10 years later, 1974, I went down. I got on the telephone and I called the infirmary where he was located when he died, and they said, all we know is that his body was shipped to Biloxi. That was his last known address. So when I was in Columbus, Mississippi, doing all of my work, I went over to to rent a car on the campus there, and there was a little Avis rent-a-car place there, and I got in this car. It was a 1974 Dodge Coronet, and I was going to drive down to Biloxi. I was going on a mission. I was going to find my father's grave. Actually, I just wanted to look and at the death certificate and see if he had acknowledged on his death certificate that he had three sons.
I see. Okay.
So I got in the car, and I put in those days they only had lap belts, so I went to put the lap belt on, and there was a left-hand belt, but there was no right-hand belt. So I got out of the car, I took the seat out, and taped to the floorboard of the car was the buckle. It was wrapped in plastic. There was a rubber band around it, and it was masking taped to the floor. This is a car that had not been driven yet. All right, it had 000 miles. I was the first person to ever not only drive it, but to rent it, of course.
Yeah.
So I undid the plastic, and I put the belt out, and I got the seat back in there, and I went to open the belt, and there was a business card inside of the belt buckle, and the business card said Candlelight Inn, Biloxi, Mississippi, and on the back of the card there was an arrow pointing to how to get to this Candlelight Inn, which was a hotel. And I thought, just ever so slightly when these things happen, it was later that I went into the booga routine. But at the moment, I didn't think much. I put the card in my pocket, and I drove down. I picked up a hitchhiker. In fact, we talked. I drove out of my way, took him there. I got it. It was the 27th of August, and it was 1974. And I pulled into Biloxi in this car, in this Dodge Coronet, and I went to the first gas station that was there. I went and got the yellow pages out, and I looked up cemeteries, figuring they would tell me because my father was buried there.
Sure.
Well, the first cemetery, there was no answer. It was 10 minutes to 5 on a Friday afternoon. The second one, it was busy. The third one was a very, very small print in the yellow pages, almost as if it was just sort of an afterthought. And I called this number, and this man came on the phone, and I said, I'm looking for a Melvin Lyle Dyer. He died in 1964, 10 years ago. His body was shipped. Could he be possibly buried there? I would like to go and visit my father's grave. And he was gone for 10 or 15 minutes. He came back and he said, yes. He said, our filing system here is a little strange. They had Coca-Cola boxes that the death registers were all filed in, and they had stains all over them. He said, I said, well, just tell me. I said, where would he be that he's buried? He said, well, it's not really a cemetery. He said it's on the back of the. He said it's on the grounds of the Candlelight Inn, and if you can find the Candlelight Inn. And I reached into my pocket, and this was one, and I opened and I turned it over, and there was a map, imprinted on this card. And I was only, Biloxi at that time. It's a big gambling center now, but at that time it was very, very small. And I drove over there, and I went to I'm getting the shivers just thinking about this now, because I went to his gravesite, and there was no marker or anything like it. It was just a little bronze kind of thing flat on the ground that just said Melvin Lyle Dyer, 1915 to 1964. And I stood there for almost 3 hours, George, and it was really the transformative experience of my life. I'm back there right now, as a matter of fact.
3 hours.
3 hours, and I kicked on the ground, and I raged, and I was angry. And then about 8 o'clock, because they had told me, when you leave, just put the chain up, because it was just a driveway there at that point in the back of this hotel, the last 10 or 15 minutes that was there, something came over me, and I suddenly said to my father, from this moment on, I send you love. I forgive you. I send you love from this moment on. Because up until that time, I would wake night after night after night just in a rage. I'd be so angry. I'd be soaking wet. I'd be meeting him someplace. I would dream about him. I would get sick. I'd be punching him. I was just filled with all of this antipathy and anger towards this man who had treated my mother in such a horrible, horrible way, and would never even show up because he was afraid she'd put him in jail because he owed her so much money. And so I walked out of there. That was 1974, and I was like a changed person. At that time, I was about 25 pounds overweight. I was drinking. My writing wasn't going. I was writing textbooks, but they weren't just that. My writing just wasn't where I wanted it to be. I got back to New York. I went down to Fort Lauderdale. I had 2 weeks before classes started in September, and I went over to a place in the Spindrift Motel down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on A1A, and I checked in there, and I wrote a book called Your Erroneous Zones in 14 days.
Bestseller.
35 million copies in 47 languages around the world. One of the it was like a life. I started running and getting myself in shape. I quit drinking. I started attracting the right people into my life. The relationships I was in at that time were horrible. Everything in my life shifted around, and it was all because of one act of forgiveness. And when people say to me, who was the most influential person in your life, I often say it was somebody that I've never met. It was when I was, Mark Twain once said that forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. And how that card got into that buckle, and how in that brand new car that had never been driven before, and how all of those things took place, I couldn't even begin to say. All I know is that moment changed my life and the direction of my life and the lives of millions of other people as well. It was a very, very powerful experience.
What a remarkable story. What did your brothers say when you went back and said, I found him?
My brothers never have cared.
Never did.
They don't care at all. I think they both have memories. I was the youngest. I still am. My oldest brother, Jim, just he remembers this guy as being someone who was always stealing, who was never around. When my mother came home from the hospital in 1940 with me, her third baby in 3 years, he had moved out and was living with another woman up in Ann Arbor. And he had abandoned his family completely, and he had stolen my grandmother's pearls in order to buy booze and stuff for her. I mean, he was just not good in those ways. But again, I feel that he stayed away. My feeling, I often say, my mother still gets angry when she thinks about him. She says, well, you can forgive him. She said, you don't remember, but I remember that bastard. I mean, she still hasn't. And I told her, I said, until you do, I said, you're still going to suffer some of the struggles and so on that you shouldn't be experiencing.
Do you sometimes feel, Wayne, that he's with you still?
Yes. I feel it right in this moment, right now, as I'm speaking, because I know these words are going out all across the country.
Absolutely.
And I think that there are people out there who have very, very tough things going on in their lives. I remember one woman whose son was murdered, and the man was on death row in San Quentin in California. And I can remember telling her this story on the radio, on a radio call-in show, and telling her that if she could only go to that prison and just forgive him for her sake, for her sanity and for her peace. And she called me back and wrote to me. She still writes to me and said that it was the first time that she had ever had peace, because she had gotten rid of that hatred. That you see, it's like a snake bite. Nobody dies from a snake bite. I mean, nobody. It is like the snake bite itself isn't what kills you. It's the poison that continues to circulate through your system after the bite. And that's what continues to hurt so many of us and cause us to be, at lower levels of energy. And the highest spiritual message there is in all spiritual literature, particularly in Christianity, is that forgiveness is at the core of it all. It's what Jesus was able to do at the last moments of his life.
It is so difficult, though, to do that. Let me cite an example and tell me how you could do this. Let's assume somebody murders, your daughter or your son, and I mean, could you forgive that person? I'm not so sure, Wayne, I could.
Well, I've given this a lot of thought, and I know that I would. Yes, I know that I would. I wouldn't have been able to say that 10 years ago, even. But at this point in my life, I think that the most the closest you will ever be to God is when, and that's really what intention is all about. It's like really connecting ourselves back to the source from which we all emanated, and that is God is forgiving. God is giving and forgiving, and we want to be in harmony with the source energy that we emanated from. It would be, I wouldn't say that people shouldn't be held responsible for what they do, and I don't think that we could say I would just forget it. But
I mean, the person should be convicted and everything that
Right.
goes with it, right?
I think so. Yeah, I don't think they should be murdered. That's just my personal opinion.
Right.
I don't think we should kill anything. I've really learned that lesson, and I can tell you how I've learned that as well later on, perhaps. But that it isn't up to us to take life. But if it does come along, see, I have sort of a sense that at the moment of our conception, that of course our birth is in there, and everything that's going to happen to us. I mean, I'm sitting here rubbing the top of my head, which has no hair on it, and every one of those hairs that fell out was all in that tiny little drop of human protoplasm at the beginning of my conception. And I think our birth is in there, and I think our death is in there. I think because we're not here as human beings having a spiritual experience. In my estimation, it's the reverse, that we are all spiritual beings, infinite spiritual beings, having a temporary human experience. And so if we remove ourselves from this human experience of our body that begins and ends, and see ourselves as infinite beings who are in a parentheses in eternity, just open parentheses your birth, close parentheses your death, but that surrounding that parentheses is the infinity that all of us are a part of. Living from that infinite perspective allows us to forgive and to know that no one dies.
You started out more, if I can recall, more in a kind of scientific, kind of psychological aspects of your approach to issues. You seem to be more spiritual now.
Yeah, it's again, great teacher, Carl Jung. I have an actual interview that I treasure here of him on tape. There aren't very many of them.
No.
And in his powerful book written back when I was 12 years old in 1952 on Modern Man in Search of a Soul, he says that when we become adults, we are still going through developmental stages, and he called these stages archetypes. He said there are 4. The lowest is the archetype of the athlete, which is the time in our adult life when our primary emphasis is on our body and what it can do and how beautiful it is and how strong it is, and we identify ourselves by looking in the mirror. A lot of the days of putting Brill cream and Colgate on your hair and telling yourself that I am this body and what it can do. He said as you grow developmentally as an adult, you go through what he called the archetype of the warrior, which is the time in your adult life when you start to act like warriors. And what do warriors do? They go out there, they defeat, they're in competition with, and they evaluate who they are on the basis of how much they have and who they're better than and whether they're number one and so on. He said if you're still growing, you go through what he called the archetype of the statesman or the stateswoman, which is when you finally stop saying what are my quotas and what's in it for me and what can I get and who am I better than, and you begin to say how may I serve and what can I do, and ultimately he said you reach the highest archetype, which is the archetype of the spirit, when you finally begin to understand what Jesus meant when he said you're in this world, but you're not of this world.
We'll be back with Dr. Wayne Dyer. I'm George Norrie. Couple more hours to go, and yes, those of you sending me messages, I promise we will open up the phone lines, not next hour, but the hour after that.
Subscribe to the After Dark newsletter online at www.coasttocoastam.com. Just click through the orange type to the secure server.
And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie with Dr. Wayne Dyer. Wayne, when you have the ability to forgive, did you have to teach yourself something in order to do that?
It was nothing that I was even conscious of. In fact, it wasn't until much later when I looked at that card and had a realization of all the things that had happened, of that I was participating in something that was much greater than myself. Because I think, our lives, have much greater purpose to them than, and there's something much greater going on than our individual lives reflect. And it wasn't until I think years and years later that I realized the importance and the power of that forgiving act. I mean, I can go back to it now as a real watershed moment in my life. But at the time that it was taking place, all I could do is I could just see that I was changing, and I wasn't sure quite what it was or why I was doing it. But I found myself becoming more compassionate and more caring and less judgmental. I think that true nobility is not about being better than anybody else. It's about being better than you used to be. And I think I was starting to get to be better than I used to be. And I think today I am as well.
What is it what's out there that when people start surrounding themselves with being positive by getting rid of the negativity in their lives, things change for them? Why does it work?
They do, because when we move closer and closer to the place that we came from, see, all of us emanated here from the same place. You know, quantum physics teaches us that particles themselves do not create more particles. That if you take the particle that began you, that tiny little microscopic dot, and you take it back to its origins, and you look through the through the atoms and the electrons and the subatomic particles, you ultimately discover that we came from an energy field. That there's no if you take the tiniest subatomic particle and that we call quarks and put them in particle accelerators and collide them and open up these particle accelerators, you discover that there's nothing there. There's only an energy there, and that energy is the source of everything. I mean, I've always said that Jesus was a physics major. That when Jesus said it's the spirit that gives life, he was really talking about what quantum physicists like Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein and Max Planck and so on came along and taught us, in the early part of the 20th century, that the energy field that we all emanate from is where we want to return. God realization is the highest place that we can get to. And at that subatomic level, when we start, Deepak has often said to me many times, he said, Wayne, quantum physics is not only stranger than you think it is, it's stranger than you can think. Because when you observe a tiny little particle, just by the nature of the way that you observe it, you change what you're observing. The observer literally affects what it is that they are observing. And there's an ultimate truth that I talk about on the PBS special on this book, The Power of Intention, which is that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And it's like, I just was the recipient of what's called the Einstein Award at the Yeshiva University, the Einstein School of Medicine.
Congratulations for that.
Yeah, it was a great honor. And I went there and I talked to them about his most famous observation to me was, he said, the most important decision you'll ever make in your life is to decide whether you live in a friendly universe or whether you live in a hostile universe. And if you believe that you live in a hostile universe, you will attract that kind of evidence for you all the time, and you'll attract those kinds of people, and you'll put your thoughts on them, and your thoughts are the energy of God. And so you'll attract what it is that you are placing your attention on. Whereas if you're living in a constant state of appreciation, and you have a sense that this is a beautiful universe, and you don't put your energy and your thoughts on what you don't want, because if your thoughts are on what you don't want, and whether you like it or not, what you think about is what you're going to get, whether you want it or not, what you're continually thinking about, so that you'll start attracting like-minded people, and before you know it, these things that you earlier were referring to, we were earlier referring to as synchronistic events and so on, become absolute awarenesses or absolute knowings, because you're moving into a place called being in spirit or inspired. And there was a great teacher who lived 300 years before Christ. His name was Patanjali. And Patanjali said this about inspiration. He said, when you're inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, he said, all of your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction. And you find yourself in a new and a great and a wonderful world. And then he said these words, which are really relevant to what we're talking about. He said, dormant forces, faculties, and talents come alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. That's one of the most important and relevant words ever. Dormant forces, that is, forces that you thought were inactive, that were dead, that were not available to you, come alive when you're inspired, meaning when you're in spirit. So that when your thoughts are of God or like God, that is, the source that you came from excludes no one. It doesn't say, okay, you get to have your fingernails grow and your heart beat but you don't. The source that we all emanate from excludes no one. So every thought that you have that excludes some and includes others is a thought that's not of God. And when you leave your source, when you leave source energy, you lose the power of your source. So that when you have exclusive thoughts, hateful thoughts, shameful thoughts, fearful thoughts, all thoughts that are not of God, you lose the ability to manifest, to attract into your life what you want, to create what I call the power of intention.
So right. What does it mean, Wayne, when you tell people you have good karma or your karma's not good? Well, what does that all mean?
It doesn't mean anything to me. I just think it's the idea that there's somebody up there in the sky keeping these Akashic records and saying that you have to work out your karma. To me, that just doesn't make any sense at all. We are whatever it is that we place our attention on. Every experience that we have, we attract into our lives. We have to take responsibility for what we're experiencing, including our diseases, our illnesses, our fears, our worries, and even the fact that we can't find a parking place. When you put your attention on looking for a place to park, you'll start looking for a place to park when you pull into a lot rather than looking for no place to park, and you'll start attracting it, and you'll see people even get out of your way and say, look, I'll move out for you. You can literally make anything happen by putting your attention on it and keeping your attention on it, and never allowing an obstacle to show up in your way. Karma and believing that this is stuff that's left over from past lives and so on, I just can't relate to that.
Well put, though, about the parking, because if you believe it, if you think it, it becomes so. And if you take the opposite approach, your whole life collapses around it.
We become what we think about. I mean, it's, as a man thinketh, so is he. It's the most profound words in the Old Testament. And this whole idea that if that's true, George, if we become what we think about, and then you have to ask yourself, okay, what do I think about? Where are most of my thought energy? Where is it? And most of it, if you look at it, is on what you don't want, or on what's missing, or on what you don't like, or on what always has been, or even on what is. Just what are the circumstances of my life that I don't like? The fact that I don't have enough, that my relationship isn't good, that I've got an upset stomach, that my kids are not doing well, whatever. And if your thoughts are continuously on all of those things, you will attract all of those things into your life if that law of attraction that I've just described is true. So again, it goes back to, what do highly functioning people do? They put their attention on what they intend to manifest, and they shift off of what is or what always has been or what others think for them, and put their attention on it, and they're like a pit bull. They just won't let go of it. And it's like, this is what it means to be, you introduced me at the very beginning as the father of motivation. I don't know, somebody just laid that label. I've got 8 kids. I don't need another one.
You got 8 kids? Good for you.
But I saw an interview with Arthur Miller in the New York Times, the great playwright.
Absolutely.
The Death of a Salesman and The Crucible and so on.
See, and I also remember him as the guy who was once married to Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah, he's my hero, too. Well, of course, everybody else was, too. But at any rate, he's now in his 80s, in his mid-80s, and the interviewer said to him, are you working on another play? And I loved his answer. He said, I don't know, but I probably am.
Yep.
And he was making a reference like when you're inspired, it's like, motivated people get a hold of an idea and carry it through to its logical conclusion. Don't let anybody interfere with it. But inspired people let an idea get a hold of them, and that idea takes them where you were intended to go, because you've surrendered, you've let go, you've reconnected yourself back to your source. You've connected to this field of intention that we've been speaking about here. And once you do that, absolutely. I mean, you can write a book without an outline. You can get into flow. You can get into what athletes call, the zone. Where, and all of us have been in that at one time or another.
Absolutely. And you're in it. When you're in it, you know you're in it.
I was in it this morning in a tennis match. I mean, it didn't matter. Even if I hit a ball out, the wind would blow it back in.
Yeah.
I mean, everything just was, and I was just like, it's such a peaceful place. And I always just remind myself, I just say the word intention over and over again, that intention is not what I do with my ego. It's allowing myself to uncorrode the link between myself and the field of intention from which I came.
Successful people, and I don't mean those with tremendous wealth, but people who are just successful within themselves, do they all have some common traits and denominators?
Yeah, by and large. The greatest definition I've ever heard of success was written by Henry David Thoreau. at Walden. You know, he was in prison in Concord, Massachusetts, and his neighbor from 2 streets over and 7 houses down came over and offered to pay his bail to get him out. His name was, you probably heard of him, Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Oh, sure.
And
on Golden, let's see, on Golden Pond was,
right.
Yeah.
And here was, Emerson came to the jail at Concord and said, Ralph, what are you doing in there? And he said, what are you doing out there? And he left because he refused to pay his taxes. He wrote his essay on the necessity of civil disobedience because he said that anybody who would go along with and pay their taxes to a country is doing what they're doing to the Native Americans, taking their land, and he was protesting the law that Andrew Jackson signed in 1830 called the Indian Removal Act, and he just thought it was immoral, and you couldn't pay your taxes to a country that was doing that, and he went to Walden, he wrote this on the necessity of civil disobedience, and in there he said, if you advance confidently in the direction of your own dreams and endeavor to live the life that you have imagined, you will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. It will chase after you rather than you chasing it. And self-actualizing people, according to Thoreau and according to Maslow, are people, number one, who are independent of the good opinion of other people. 2, they have a burning desire within them that they can't put out. And 3, they're detached from outcome. And that sounds like it would conflict, that to be have a burning desire but be detached from outcome. They don't really care so much about what the results are. They're in the process of what it is that they're doing. They have a knowing. They sort of let go of all of that. And they're independent of the good opinion of other people. They have I wrote a little book called 10 Secrets for Success and Inner Peace, and one of them, one of those secrets I wrote when I was a young kid, 19 years old, in the Navy. After I had read The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy.
You read a lot, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I still do. And Tolstoy has Ilyich dying in his wife's hands, and his wife, he looked up at his wife and he despised his wife, and he despised everything about his life. And he said to her, he said, what if my whole life has been wrong? And then he died. And I took out a little notepad and I wrote down, Dear Wayne, don't die. I was 19 on my way over to join the USS Ranger in Japan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
With your music still in you. Don't die with your music still in you. Self-actualizing people know that they came here with a mission, and that their purpose is something that is inherent in every cell of their being, and they're not going to allow anybody to interfere with it and get in the way.
Are you happy with the direction you've now gone over these years?
Oh, absolutely. I'm totally at peace when I'm about to speak, and I do quite a bit of it. And as I'm being introduced, I have a ritual that I go through. And one of the things I do is I repeat a line from A Course in Miracles that says, "If you knew," that means without any doubt. If you had an absolute knowing, if you knew who walked beside you at all times on this path that you have chosen, you could never experience fear or doubt again. And I have no fear or no doubt in me whatsoever about anything that I'm doing. Ever since that experience in Biloxi with my father and that act of forgiveness, I've known that there's a senior partner that is working with me at all times, and I'm totally at peace with it all. And it's just, I rely upon it, and I have a knowing about it, and I know that I can attract whatever it is that I put my attention on at any time in my life.
I don't know, Wayne, if we have a machine that could record energy that people emit, but I bet if you were ever hooked up to one, it would go off the scales.
Well, I feel highly energized. I really do. I mean, it's not something that I try to propel onto other people. I mean, there's just a knowing. I mean, it's like today I was driving over to the other side of the island. I'm on Maui right now, and there was a young kid about 20, 21 who was hitchhiking, and I picked him up, and I knew that I was going to in the 30 minutes or so that I had him in the car, that I was going to impact him, and I gave him a copy of that little book, The 10 Secrets, and I signed it for him as he got out. His name was Aaron, and he just said, I'm just so juiced. I can't, when I talked to him about meditation and being kind, and he's a surfer, and being, in harmony with the surf and so on, and just doing it in a very peaceful, loving way. I know that kid's life was impacted dramatically by that experience that we had this afternoon, and I think we can do that a lot in our lives without trying to preach or without trying to get anybody to agree with us.
What made you pick up a hitchhiker? Because I would not have.
Well, on Maui, It's just
different.
It's just a way of life. I mean, you see kids standing out there with their surfboards, and they want to go from one side of the island to the other.
Okay. It's not like somebody on the side of a road with a...
No, but I was in the Navy for 4 years, and I went from... I was stationed down in Maryland, and I went back home to Michigan on the weekends. I had a girlfriend up there, and getting home was really important. And I lived by hitchhikers. I mean, I just put my uniform on, stuck my thing out on the Ohio Turnpike.